You are listening to Down Home. Welcome to Down Home, the Nova Scotian experience from two black men. I'm Derek Wise, and on behalf of Jay Jones, thank you for tuning in. The recent George Floyd trial in the States and the killing of Daunte Wright, another unarmed black man in Minnesota, has caused me and Jay to pause and take stock of what we have discussed and learned over the last 10 months of developing the Down Home podcast. Join us as we talk about what caught our attention over the last 12 episodes of Down Home.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking.
Hey everybody, welcome to an episode of Down Home. But this one is a particular special one because we're kind of doing a little recap of some of the episodes that we've recorded so far and what Dee and I have learned along the way. It's been a cool journey, and needless to say, we're at another flashpoint where, just last week or a couple weeks ago, there was another black man who got shot in the States, Daunte Wright, and that's why we started this kind of podcast, because of the George Floyd stuff that happened last summer, and it kind of was a flashpoint. So we wanted to open up this conversation, but it led to deeper things.
It did lead to deeper conversations. And looking back, we have been very surprised about how candid our conversations have been with our guests. This started right off the bat in episode 2 with our friend Kevin Yard, when he talked about first learning about the events of Africville.
What struck me was the fact that he was so saddened that was a part of Canadian history, Black Canadian history, that he didn't know.
So one of the interesting things for me, both during the trip and even now, 4 years later, is how disconnected I was from the Black experience in Canada. Mm-hmm. Right. And when you talk about systemic racism, another one of the manifestations is education, what you learn and what is your history. So didn't really know about the Black loyalists, the Maroons who settled in Jamaica and then traveled to Sierra Leone because of the circumstances and the environment that they faced once in Nova Scotia. I didn't know about Africville. So there's this sadness that comes. Right, there's a sadness about this is Canadian history, not just the African Canadian experience, but this is Canadian history that we weren't taught.
Yeah,
and so there's a sadness about that,
and that sort of made me go, my goodness, so many things are so much deeper, like the systems that, like the curriculum that we have in education, we don't know this stuff, and then to have a grown man in his 40s going, I'm sad because I didn't know that. That sort of brought up kind of feelings for me. So going through these, learning and interviewing these people, you just sort of start to tap in on something different, and it makes you feel a little bit different,
Yeah, that episode was quite enlightening. We know, I should say, we know Kevin on a personal basis, but to have him come on to the podcast and talk in that capacity, on his professional capacity, he was well versed and quite knowledgeable about the system, and his take on it was quite enlightening, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. And then we had an episode called Back in the Day with Lindsay Sharp, an old high school friend. He happened to be, growing up in the north end of Halifax as a white person. So he kind of brought a unique perspective.
Jay is referring to episode 9, which was our conversation with old high school friend Lindsay Sharp. Lindsay made the good point during this episode that we as Canadians get caught up in the reporting of racialized violence down in the States, when the same type of violence happens here in Canada.
I get caught up in myself is sort of like the media sensation of the race in America, because it gets so broadcasted so much. Sometimes you forget about, Canada and the way that it it is, you know what I mean? So he brought up sort of a good point about that.
And yeah, I mean, so here we sit and going, geez, look at them down there, and they can't, this is ridiculous. How could they behave these ways? And all the kind of higher than now stuff that I find we do sometimes in Canada, because we were the other side of the Underground Railroad, as if then there was no slavery in Canada, which is a myth entirely, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
But then this happens, and the reaction for so many people I found wasn't as equal to how offended they were by what had been happening, and obviously continues to happen every minute of every day in the States, right? And it's like, no, this is the same exact set of systems that lead to a certain group of people being allowed to be treated that way without any help or assistance, protection from the state, right? Which is appalling to me. Yeah.
And just sort of makes you look at, what's going on in Canada, because there is a lot. This podcast has been a great tool to sort of just at least have these conversations and get things off your chest, what we learn from other people, what we see, and what we feel.
Lindsay had a few pertinent points, like when he did talk about not necessarily defunding police, but reallocation of resources. He made some really pertinent points, and it stretches from Halifax all the way up to here to Toronto. And one point that my wife has made is that here in Toronto, the mounted police have a budget of $5 million. These are funds that could be reallocated elsewhere. The mounted police in Toronto don't actually serve a vital function, in my opinion. So to reallocate those funds to possibly having a part of the force that is there to who's trained in de-escalation of certain situations.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yeah, actually, Lindsay's actual quote was, "You can't have cops with guns acting as agents for mental health." And then there was the great episode with Tony Smith, sort of spearhead leader behind Voices and the issues that were going on with the Nova Scotia Colored Home for Children, from being inspired from a situation in the home sort of years later to put him in the position to sort of look at what had happened there.
Tony's unique perspective was too important to miss any details. So our conversation with Tony Smith happened over 2 episodes, both 11 and 12. Here's Tony talking about the restorative approach to the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children inquiry.
Continue with the pathways that we have in place. Mm-hmm. And we also wanted to have an organization that is separate from government in that sense. So, and to keep the process of what we adopted to this in place moving forward. I think one of the most powerful speeches of the previous Premier, Steve McNeil, was in our closing ceremony, and he talks about this process, and that it should be used everywhere in all departments. And as I mentioned, Derek, earlier, that this same process, when the United Nations came to study across Canada about racism, they said racism is worse in Nova Scotia. But the good thing about Nova Scotia, they have the restorative inquiry, because not only is that process good for Nova Scotia, it's good for all across Canada. Mm-hmm. So it's a way of not naming, blaming, and shaming. I mean, if you're constantly pointing the finger at somebody about the wrongs they did, well, they don't want to speak to you.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's like, okay, let's learn from these experiences, because sometimes policies are in place not to intend to hurt people, but if you don't know it and nobody tells you kind of stuff, well, then you're going to continue thinking that you're not doing harm.
Yeah. And so it was good to hear their take on how they have a restorative initiative to sort of open the doors to talk with government officials. And the restorative initiative is not about placing blame. It's about accepting what happened and seeing what you can do going forward, not to have anyone hurt. And I just thought that was a really good take and a really inspiring and a very, very, very eye-opening episode, because that's a part of Nova Scotia history that isn't really well known.
Yeah, true. And that framework of the restorative process is it's an idea that's been kicked around for quite some time, but I think this is one of the first times that you actually saw it implemented on a wide scale and in a pertinent scale, an important scale
Yeah. Yeah.
with the Home for Colored Children. So to actually have that inquiry spearheaded by the civilians,
Yeah.
that was unique. Because as Tony had stated, that usually these inquiries are run by retired judges, right?
Yeah.
And for them to Voices, the members of Voices, to actually spearhead the inquiry and to run the inquiry in the restorative framework,
Mhm.
actually opened doors for them, and it opened doors, and it resolved the inquiry in a timely manner,
Mhm.
and it resolved the inquiry in a lot cheaper fashion. As Tony stated, they had money left over, which is unusual for these inquiries.
Yeah, for sure, because
So
they
it
usually go on.
Yeah, so it was effective. It was effective.
Yeah.
It was eye opening, and I'm glad Tony actually stopped off and shared a story with us. It was one of, I think, actually, that was probably one of our most important episodes.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's been so many great moments, just to sort of look at, and also just to celebrate the Nova Scotia as a whole. Because like when we started this off, it was just like, how can we sort of also celebrate the resilience and the strength that we come from? And even us talking about sort of how our church, all the members of the congregation, a lot of them were sort of black iconic figures that sort of were really in the trenches fighting for a good, strong black community,
Mhm.
which was really cool. And we were able to post some of those on our Instagram account.
Yeah, one of the episodes that kind of comes to mind right off the bat was the episode with our mothers,
Hmm.
which was a great episode to actually tape. And a lot of people have given feedback and said, hey, this is one of our favorite episodes. But the episode I'm referring to is episode 4. We had a few audio issues with this one, but the conversation still turned out great. In this clip from the episode, my mother talks about protesting the events of Africville.
During the 60s and 70s, we had in Nova Scotia the dismantling of Africville. And during that time, it was, of course, very upsetting for everyone. I can't imagine what it was like to live through that and live in the community of Africville and seeing it destroyed right under your feet. But it certainly did start the whole notion of we have to do something about it. And so there were demonstrations and there were sit-ins. And I can remember distinctly that I called my mother one day from school. They actually had pay phones at the school. And I called her and said that we had to go down to City Hall and sit in. And for anyone who remembers my mother, she was a very conservative, small c conservative person. But she met me down there
Hmm.
and joined the protest. And so, there was that protest. There was, even back in that day, and I'm sure, Stacy, you remember some of this as well, there was rumor and incidents of police cruelty. And so we demonstrated against that.
And my grandmother actually joined her at City Hall for the protest. That I found that surprising, considering that Edith Chandler was a conservative woman, a deaconess in the church. For her to actually sit in on this protest, that was sort of amazing.
Yeah, and your mom also had ties to Walter Borden.
Yeah.
Him talking about the Kawacha House was really kind of a cool thing to hear, and how Stokely Carmichael came here,
Yeah.
From the Black Panthers, and just sort of talking about those times. And and also sort of Patty Jones, who was Rocky Jones's son, him mentioning that what his father was involved with, and he also said something in his interview, something like that. The people here were just as afraid as they were kind of in America at the time. So can only imagine what it might have been like at that time. But it was good to hear Walter Borden's perspective from it all.
The interview with Walter was great. He, again, really happy that he shared his time with us. One of the points in his interview that kind of struck me was the actual trip that they took the kids from Kawacha House on. And there was a presentation by civil rights leaders at the time.
We went one year to a huge conference in Kitchener-Waterloo. And that was the first time that we took them as a group of them, and put them in the midst of people like Saul Alinsky and that type.
Mm-hmm.
And watch them perform. Now, we had told them, instructed them that, number one, when you don't understand something, make no difference who's saying it, you tell them that you don't understand what they're saying. So would they please take it and put it into some form that you could understand? If you're going to be talking to me, at least talk to me so that I can understand. This is what they, and so now here they are in the midst of these people. These were the top, activists of the day, Timothy Leary, Saul Alinsky, these people.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first opening session, and they were, the people, the organizers were laying out this agenda, because this would be a week-long thing, and this was going to take place here, and they were speaking in all this language that, we understood because we had to deal with it all the time. They didn't. Now was the great test. Were they going to say anything? Well, indeed they did. Just put up their hands to one and says, I don't know what the F you're talking about. So, and the people just like, well, what they did was they adjourned the meeting and went back and redid their scheduling. Right. It was that kind of thing. These young people, they had reached that stage, you see.
Mm-hmm. And, Walter and the leaders of Kawacha House actually empowered the kids to question and ask questions during that presentation, which, we were talking, that was unusual for the time. Our parents' generation, they were taught to be seen and not heard. So for them to actually raise their hands and question, and actually ask questions and say, hey, we need this information, that was unusual for the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was really good. So overall, like what are some of the things that you've learned, and how have certain things made you feel by interviewing these people about issues from the past, or just talking about Nova Scotia, into what's going on today? Like, have you had any kind of transformative moments, like in the way you see things now?
It's definitely lended itself to a bit more clarity, I guess. It's made it clear that me personally, I cannot stand by the side anymore and say, oh, that's horrible. Mm-hmm. Like, we need to speak up. We need to lend our voice to these situations, from last year, from George Floyd, and then all the way through to Daunte Wright recently. That's kind of illustrated the fact that things haven't changed, even though there's been a lot of bluster and noise over the last year. recent things that have happened. There was the video of the cop in Halifax.
Yeah, man.
This happened recently, about a month ago. This police officer who is has his gun drawn and is screaming obscenities at some person over a traffic stop. That again lends itself to illustrating that things are pretty bad. And if this is in Canada, we no longer can say, oh, look how bad it is down the States. These are things that are happening in Canada. Whether our media covers it or not, these are things that are happening here in Canada. And then we've talked about it before from, we reach back into the past to Toronto and look at Sammy Yatim, and then we come up to recent history to Clive Mensa, two young men that have lost their lives, and these are years in between. Cop involvement, and nobody talks about Clive Mensa because there's no video.
No, not much coverage on that.
There's no coverage. There's no video of it, right? Why was there so much coverage on Sammy Yatim? Because there was like 5 different videos of it, right? But unfortunately, no one's talking about Clive Mensa, this poor gentleman that lost his life after, suffering some sort of break in his own backyard. And after, an interaction with police officers that lasted all of 2 minutes. And he loses his life. So, all this is just kind of illustrating that things are not great, and we have to talk about it, and we have to lend our voice to this, and point out and illustrate that, hey, things are just as bad here in Canada. You know what I mean?
It's like it's I've been thinking about it in the sense of, it's like everything's so ingrained. It's almost like as if we expect it to be the way it is sometimes, and these systems that are in place that have been going against people of color, indigenous people, poor people. These are the things that people really don't look at. Having these conversations, it opens the door for generations to come to maybe just look at things differently, because it's all here. It's, we can't avoid it. It's been going on for years, and you can't be quiet because, people are dying. People are fear for their life. Even I haven't had really any altercations with police officers or anything like that. Maybe when I was younger, being in the proximity of it, seeing the way things can go down. Even now, you kind of fear that something might happen if something does happen. You know what I mean? It's in the back of your mind.
Yeah, that's as Black men, we have to be cognizant of the way that we present ourselves. We have to be cognizant of the way that we interact with others, because even the simple things of pre-COVID, getting on an elevator with a white person who's alone. How do we present ourselves in that situation? As Black men, we have to be cognizant of it. That's the fact of the matter. In meetings in my workplace, how do I present myself? Why is that person saying that particular thing to me? Is it because of my race, or are they just disregarding me for some other reason? These are things that we have to be cognizant of. Just I think the lens has changed a little bit. We as a lot of our guests have said, the racism that we face in Canada is very subtle. For the most part. Knowing that and walking through our lives as Black men, it's always there, right?
Indeed.
We all deal with it differently as Black Canadians, Canadians, right? Because it's not right in our face.
So how do you even know? Because you're not quite sure. So I mean, the whole journey of doing a podcast with you, a lifelong friend, and being able to have these conversations, and just sort of all the beginning too, leading up to this was quite a good journey as far as friendship goes, and the way we see things and the way we have seen things growing up. Like, you know, a lot of things in the past year have got triggered for me as far as my race goes. And I never really thought about it, because it's always about survival with Black people, to just try and do what they can. I mean, we come from a long history of it. Like, our families were very important, and they try to instill strength and community above all, and, you know, love and nurturing. But that didn't prepare us for what we were about to see in the outside world. But with that being said, you learn to adapt to the situation. I think it was Corey who said, it works in different levels, which I think you mentioned before. You know, there are levels,
the onion levels.
Yeah. That.
So talking about interaction and perspective, we really would like our listeners to reach out and comment, you know, whether it be on our Facebook page, which is at 902 Down Home. You know, if you're on Facebook, you can interact with us there, or our Instagram page, which is Down Home Nova Scotia, all one word, or even send us an old-fashioned email, downhomeNS@gmail.com. So you know, reach out to us. We want to hear everyone's perspective, whether it be praising us for with our work, or telling us that we're off track. You know, any type of feedback is welcome. Or even, you know, if you actually look at our YouTube videos instead, you know, comment and tell us, you know, we should interview this person, or you should reach out to that person. Whoever wants to add their voice and tell us about their Nova Scotian experience, whether it be through the comments, or if you say, hey, this person would be a great person to interview, we're welcome for any type of feedback.
Join in the conversation if you want. You know, D just said it all, so boom bap, there you have it. But first of all, second of all, and third of all, thanks to everyone who have tuned in and listened and have given us feedback. It means a lot. It's actually pretty cool, as Derek and I are in touch all the time. So, you know, in these crazy times, it's good to still have an outlet. That's why it's that much more important that people have these conversations. And not to ramble, but
all right. Well, just take us out, Jay Jones. Take us out. I
think I just did.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
The song Breaking New Ground from The Breakdown.
On a high plateau, from the one down below to the future of the funk, getting lost in the flow. Contact with